Imagine standing inside a tomb sealed for 4,000 years. A golden mask gleams in your flashlight's beam. Beneath it lies not just a dead king, but a secret. This boy pharaoh didn't die from war, disease, or accident. He died because his family believed their blood was divine. His parents were siblings. So were his grandparents. So were theirs. Each generation added another layer of genetic decay. Being born royal meant being born into a body built to collapse. Deformities became tradition. Bent spines, malformed jaws, stunted lungs, gifts they believed from the gods. In reality, they were biological warnings. Ancient Egypt's elite didn't understand genetics. They understood myth, and in that myth, purity was power. The pharaoh was more than king. He was a living god, descended from Ra. To preserve that divine essence, they married their sisters, generation after generation. The rationale was spiritual, political, and absolute. Gods could only marry gods. Mortal blood was unworthy. Priests approved. Advisors calculated advantages. No one considered the price. And so began a slow descent masked as tradition. In the early dynasties, signs of inbreeding were mild. Unusual facial features, slightly bowed limbs. Priests called these sacred marks, but like silt in the Nile, genetic damage accumulated invisibly. One ruler's clubfoot, another's fertility issues. The whispers began, but were always silenced by ritual, myth, and fear. Despite their brilliance in architecture, astronomy, and writing, Egyptians failed to recognize the root of their royal suffering. Court physicians recorded countless deformities and early deaths, but never questioned their origin. Religious devotion blinded them. Every sickly child was seen not as a warning, but a wonder. The palace became a stage for quiet tragedy. Children born with curved spines were called chosen. A prince who limped was touched by the gods. Stillbirths were divine mysteries. Each generation, the suffering deepened. Yet the devotion to purity only grew stronger. This was not isolated to one family, it was systemic. Egypt's rulers weren't just making decisions about governance, they were engineering the slow collapse of their own bloodline. What began as a divine preservation became, over centuries, a genetic catastrophe. In the 14th century BCE, that catastrophe reached its most visible form, in the birth of a boy who would change everything. In 1353 BCE, a boy was born into Egypt's royal house. His name would become Akhenaten. Before he was called a heretic, before he changed Egypt's religion, he was a child in a failing body. His skull was stretched and elongated, his hips widened like a woman's. His chest swelled into soft curves that no royal robe could disguise. Everyone in the palace saw it. No one spoke of it. Raised in marble halls, the prince lived among whispers and downcast eyes. Servants averted their gaze. Artists painted gods on temple walls, tall, straight, flawless, while the boy stared into polished bronze and saw a twisted reflection. His family, also shaped by centuries of incest, called his deformities sacred signs. His priests spun theology around his suffering. If the gods worked in mysterious ways, then surely this boy was the proof. When he took the throne, Akhenaten did what no other pharaoh had dared. He told the truth, not with words, but with art. He ordered his likeness carved as it was. No more idealized images, no more sculpted illusions. Reliefs began to show bulging bellies, narrow chins, swollen skulls. His family too was depicted with strange alien features. What historians once mistook for stylistic innovation was something darker, an unfiltered record of genetic collapse. Akhenaten married Nefertiti, his likely cousin or sister, and together they had 6 daughters. Sons died in infancy, their fragile bodies unable to survive the inherited mutations. Even those who lived bore the same elongated features. Some were hidden from sunlight, others struggled to speak or walk. This king's religious revolution, the rejection of Egypt's pantheon in favor of a single god, Aten, may not have been just spiritual. Perhaps it was desperation. If the old gods had cursed his family, perhaps a new one might offer mercy. He moved the capital to a new city, Amarna, isolating the royal bloodline further. But no deity could rewrite his DNA. In Amarna's desert palaces, genetic damage was treated as divinity and deformity as sacred identity. Art flourished, but so did disease. Akhenaten died young, like so many in his line. His religious experiment crumbled, his city abandoned, his name chiseled off monuments. Yet his legacy endured, passed down through corrupted genes, to a son who would be even more famous in death than in life. A boy king destined to carry the final weight of his family's broken inheritance. In 1341 BCE, a child was born into the ruins of Akhenaten's failed utopia. His name was Tutankhamun. To the world, he would become a golden icon of Egypt's grandeur. In truth, he was a tragic embodiment of royal decay. By age 9, Tutankhamun was crowned pharaoh. But behind the ceremony stood a reality of pain. His left foot was twisted inward, a club foot. His spine was curved, his chest malformed, his immune system fragile. Simple acts like walking required assistance. Pain shadowed him constantly. Even on the golden throne, he was too weak to sit upon comfortably. Palace records later uncovered by archaeologists revealed the scale of his suffering. More than 130 walking sticks were found in his tomb. Tools of necessity, not symbols of majesty. Some were gilded, others plain, all meant to help a boy who could barely stand. Temple murals showed him hunting and leading battles, but these were lies. Art concealed the truth his body could not. Tutankhamun's wife, Akhenaten, was also his half-sister. Like him, she carried the same genetic burden. Their union was not just incestuous, but biologically doomed. They tried to produce an heir. The results were two stillborn daughters, tiny mummified corpses found buried with them, heartbreaking symbols of a collapsing dynasty. Within palace walls, isolation became total. The boy king lived in luxury, but was starved of friendship and freedom. Protected by walls, silks, and servants, he was still a prisoner of his own DNA. Other children were kept away to avoid disease or suspicion. His body failed him, but his image had to remain divine. Royal artists avoided realism entirely, drawing him in perfect symmetry, while his real body withered in private. Physicians documented every symptom: bone disease, hormonal imbalances, immune deficiencies. They didn't know the cause, but they knew he was fragile. Modern DNA testing, done centuries later, confirmed what they couldn't. Tutankhamun was the product of sibling incest, a living result of 3 centuries of genetic isolation. At just 19, the young king died, likely from malaria, a disease survivable by healthy bodies, but fatal for one so compromised. His body was rushed into the tomb. His name, like his father's, was nearly forgotten. And yet, in death, he achieved immortality. Not for his reign, but for what his body revealed. The boy king's suffering, sealed behind golden doors, became the clearest evidence of a dynasty unraveling from within. You'd think Tutankhamun's death would have been warning enough. A dynasty brought low by its own obsession with purity. But history rarely learns quickly. Over 1,000 years later, new rulers arrived, foreigners with swords, ambition, and the same fatal mistake. In 323 BCE, after Alexander the Great's death, his general Ptolemy seized Egypt. He was Macedonian, not Egyptian. But he understood one thing well. To rule the Egyptians, he had to look like a pharaoh. That meant more than crowns and rituals. It meant divine blood and sibling marriage. The Ptolemies didn't just revive the practice, they perfected it. For 300 years, the dynasty became a closed genetic loop. Brother married sister. Their children married each other, over and over. The royal family tree became a web of repetition, names, genes, and mistakes, echoing generation to generation. These were not distant political marriages. These were siblings, raised together, forced into adult unions. The psychological damage was matched only by the genetic consequences. By the time of the final rulers, bloodlines were so tangled that family members were siblings, cousins, uncles, and parents to one another, often simultaneously. At the end of this grim experiment came its most famous result: Cleopatra VII. Her image, seductress, diplomat, queen, is legend. But her legacy is far more complex. Cleopatra wasn't just politically shrewd, she was genetically cursed. Her family had endured 2.5 centuries of inbreeding. Her facial features were likely pronounced, perhaps even deformed, but royal propaganda painted her as a beauty. The truth may lie elsewhere: her intellect. She spoke 9 languages, studied philosophy and science, and ruled with unmatched skill. Her liaisons with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were more than political. They were biological strategies. She needed to break the cycle. Her children by Roman fathers might have been the dynasty's only hope for renewal. Stronger, healthier heirs, finally free from the Ptolemaic curse. But Rome had its own brutal logic. After Cleopatra's suicide in 30 BCE, her children were hunted and killed. Octavian, soon to be Augustus, couldn't allow rivals with divine blood to live. The last hope for genetic redemption died with them. Ironically, the foreigners who had once conquered Egypt were ultimately conquered by Egypt's deadliest idea: bloodline purity. The Ptolemies came as rulers, but left as victims of the very ideology they tried to imitate. Egypt's royal history wasn't one long chain of incest, it was a cycle. Periods of openness brought stability. Obsession with purity brought collapse. The pattern repeated for millennia. In the Old Kingdom, sibling marriage appeared sporadically. But as dynasties grew in power, so did the belief that their blood was sacred. Later, during the Middle Kingdom, rulers began marrying foreign princesses, Nubian, Libyan, Near Eastern. Genetic diversity returned, and with it, healthier heirs. Lifespans grew, deformities lessened. The empire thrived, but prosperity breeds arrogance. By the time of the New Kingdom, pharaohs like Akhenaten reverted to sibling marriage, plunging Egypt back into its most destructive cycle. Art from this era, elongated skulls, twisted limbs, was not symbolic. It was documentation of hereditary decay, rendered in stone and pigment. The Ptolemaic dynasty marked the final and most extreme phase. 3 centuries of incest had turned royal identity into a biological death sentence. These were not myths. Modern genetics confirms it. The royal mummies bear the marks: skull deformities, fragile bones, immune deficiencies, hormonal disorders. These were not the children of gods, they were victims of ideology. But the damage wasn't only physical. Imagine waking each morning in marble halls, worshipped by thousands, but barely able to stand. Imagine your jaw aching with every bite, your lungs fighting for breath, your body collapsing under gold robes. Royal children grew up isolated from the world, unable to form friendships or feel normal affection. Their siblings were their only companions, and eventually their spouses. Their deformities stared back at them in every mirror and every portrait of an ancestor called divine. For royal women, pregnancy meant agony. Most knew the odds: miscarriage, stillbirth, or a child too deformed to survive. Many faded from public life, haunted by loss. Some turned to wine and opium to numb the pain. In the end, the pharaohs didn't preserve divinity, they dismantled it. They became history's most tragic lesson in genetics. Not by design, but by delusion. Modern science revealed what they could not: that harmful genes, passed from sibling to sibling, accumulate like a poison that no ritual can purify. Jaw deformities, once painted as sacred, skull shapes once seen as godlike, all were signs of a silent internal collapse. Their mummies now speak more clearly than any hieroglyph. They don't chant praises, they warn us that health cannot be ruled by ideology. That power can blind even the most brilliant civilization to its own destruction. And that biology, unlike gods, cannot be bargained with. The pharaohs wanted to be remembered as immortals. Instead, they became a genetic cautionary tale. Their suffering gave us wisdom. Their fall became our lesson. From golden tombs, they whisper still: choose humanity over pride, diversity over purity, life over myth,